I'm a right brain artsy person. I'm a left brain analytical person. Actually, I'm both. So a lot of us have adopted this preconceived notion that we are either left brain analytical sciencey people or we are right-brained creative artsy people. But in reality, our mind is actually shifting constantly between the focused mind, which is the left-brained, and the diffused mind, which is the right. So the major difference between the focused and diffused mind is that the focused mind is more pinpointed with what it's paying attention to. So the ideas and the information is quite closely interwoven, whereas the diffused mind is taking information from a broad spectrum. So you can imagine it as a flashlight that has the high beam, low beam setting. The high beam allows it to have a tunnel vision, straight piercing beam that is focused on one spot but doesn't have as broad of a spectrum, whereas the broader spectrum may not be piercing quite as hard, but it allows you to see a larger area overall. And now the reason it's important for us to recognize that we're constantly shifting between these two different ways of thinking is to help us avoid falling into any specific boxes or pigeonholing ourselves into any specific ways of seeing who we are. Because in reality, we can learn and evolve our minds through active and intentional action. But when we create these preconceived fixed notions about who we are and what we can do, we start blocking off different paths for us to pursue. So once you say, I'm not an artsy person or I'm not a sciencey person, we start creating narratives that will fuel and confirm that bias or that information. But in reality, you can literally become either or both. Because regardless if you think you're a left brain or a right brain person, you are engaging in both forms of thinking and learning. But, and it's a pretty big but, most of learning is just figuring out how to articulate the right questions and where the confusion is. But the problem is we live in a world where asking questions is not always encouraged because we have this idea that to ask a question is to admit our own foibles, our own weaknesses, and we don't want to be judged by our peers. So we'd rather sit with the uncomfortability of not knowing rather than admitting that we don't know and finding the answers that we need. But there are techniques that we can adopt that can allow us to learn information in ways that we didn't even know were possible. For example, here are two tricks you can use for remembering information you read. So one, if this is an informational book that you're reading, there are probably illustrations or little headings to different segments. If you just skip ahead and read these headings and look at these illustrations, you prepare your mind for the information that you're going to read. Or if you just quickly skim through a chapter before completely reading it, it'll prime your brain for what's about to experience. Technique number 2 involves just reflecting after you finish a chapter, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, informational self-help. If you just take the time to reflect on what did I learn from this chapter or what information was conveyed, then your mind is creating new neural networks for you to go down upon later on. And this process helps build up your myelin, your telomeres become stronger, and you're just working out that brain. So, actively put forth the intention to learn, and you will learn. But you do have to recognize that sitting in the uncomfortability of not knowing is part of the process of learning. So, that's the information for today, and there'll probably be more information on this topic because I'm currently reading a book by Barbara Oakley that is relating to this information. So, thanks for tuning in. Toodles.